and there's time for questions if anyone wants some questions. I don't know how long these meetings usually last, so.
They last until we all get bored and go home. But holy crap, I'm not bored.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
It's hard. I'm used to talking with people in the room, so it's hard not having that kind of, you know, feeling of feedback as you're chatting. But thanks.
Well, you can assume that everybody was nobody left, so you can assume everybody was at the edge of their seat. Folks, the meeting, we've enabled the ability for you to unmute yourself. So if you have a question or a comment that you'd like to add, this would be a good time. We'll open up the floor for anyone who'd like to ask Calvin some questions.
Yeah, Calvin, just to say, I was following your trip when you first proposed it, and I thought, holy man, that's really that's going to be an adventure. And that was a wonderful presentation. I mean, truly had me on the edge of my seat. Absolutely wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Calvin, I have a logistical question. I noticed
Yeah.
that you wear glasses sometimes, and sometimes you didn't. How did you deal with that? I'm one of these people that can't get by without glasses.
Yes, I did wear contact lenses on some days when I knew there'd be a lot more dynamic water or swell or rock gardens to go through, just so it was one less thing to deal with. I didn't want to have to carry way too much supplies for that as well. So if it was a reasonable day, I would wear my glasses, and that worked pretty well for me. So yeah, it was a mixture of contact lenses and glasses, and a lot of wiping them off. A lot of that.
And one other question, did you ever weigh your fully loaded boat, and what does it weigh empty versus what does it weigh loaded?
You know, I didn't, and later on I wish I had, because I have a pretty particular journal where I kept track of all the forecasts for every day and all kinds of little minutia and mileage, and I never weighed all the gear when I had it. But I mean, had 3 weeks of food at a resupply and all that gear. I'd have to imagine that was, you know, 120 or plus pounds plus the boat. So I'm guessing easily 200 pounds total. And then me getting in it. I definitely had days where sometimes I would be paddling away from somewhere and someone would take a picture and it was like, oh boy, he's sinking that boat, you know, because there's just so much stuff in it.
Calvin, this was amazing. You said that you didn't use GPS, but you also showed us some pictures of days when it was just great and you can't see anything to do your ranges and stuff. So yeah. How did you do on those days? What did you do? How did you navigate?
Sure. There were some of the earlier days were more challenging when there's not a lot of distinct points or rock features yet. And on those days, I actually ended up developing a system where I started counting the stream courses along the shore and matching those up to the map and using those as markers to have a good idea of which point I was getting to. It's kind of like counting rivers and streams and trying to figure out which ones were big enough to be on the map. Yeah.
I wanted to ask, what type of tarp and what size was it?
Oh, it was 10 by 8 and it was just sill nylon. I bought it. I don't remember the name of the company. It was a small company of a guy that just sews tarps in Arkansas, a kind of custom. Yeah, it was great. It was just a thin sill nylon tarp with pretty good connection points and some P-cord, and it worked out really well because it would pack into a bundle like, you know, this big for an 8 by 10 tarp. So that really did the trick.
One of the things that kind of strikes me about expeditions that's kind of the understated part of it is that you're in your tent and, you know, it's been raining and you're tired and there's a little voice that says, what the hell are you doing here? You know, it could be back. Absolutely. And then solo, I think, you know, you're leaving the comfort of your camp over and over again, and you're heading out into potentially not potentially, but dangerous conditions. And, you know, the little voice is there again. And how do you, was that an issue for you, or how did you deal with it? Because to me, you know, this is one of the things I admire in a journey like yours. I feel like it takes not just planning, but also there's a certain tenacity and courage, and also just working through the mental aspect of it, not just the physical.
Sure. I have some thoughts on that. I think, and this is probably just the way my brain is wired, but those things I talked about in terms of trying to focus on solutions and kind of being encouraging, saying, hey, look at what you have accomplished. And also the kind of the routine and the systems, there's a real comfort in that. And I had to, part of what I did was I only planned out the first, I think 4 or 5 days when I left. Everything else I didn't even bother trying. And then I just kind of kept looking 1 or 2 days ahead, or maybe 3 at the most, and looking at the weather and just trying to guess, and it was more about what is this day, and just deciding what's the right choice for that day. And when you kind of shrink your world down to that, for some reason it made it a little easier for me to just think about, okay, what can I accomplish today? And sometimes the answer was, I can, sew that rip in my rain pants and eat more and wait. And that was a good accomplishment for the day. And some days it's, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm really going to try to go far. The hardest thing mentally was there were a couple different times on the trip where I seriously considered quitting, and I had outs. And I actually ended up with a little bit of a repetitive stress injury in my forearm. And it was, it's one of those things where, it's like, well, it's kind of bugging me, but is it bad enough? Like, I could have just said, hey, okay, I'm done, because this is too much to keep doing, and this is a bad idea. And I'm like, well, let me try some ibuprofen. Let me, dial it back for a couple of days and try to, and that was the hardest thing, trying to decide, like, because what if I keep going and then I actually hurt myself? Or what if I hurt myself and I'm offshore when it happens, or when it, kind of finally comes to fruition? So it was really hard to try to figure that out and decide, is it a good idea to keep coming, or to keep paddling, to keep going out in the water every day? That was really tough. And trying to decide, am I, and it's harder to decide, I feel like, that without a lot of perspective. I did get to a place where I could make a phone call to someone finally and say, hey, here's what I'm experiencing. There's a good friend of mine who had been on many big trips himself. Here's what I'm experiencing. What do you think? And he was like, oh yeah, from what you're telling me here, you think you're okay. And that really helped. To be able to keep going. I needed that phone call at that point, as I think it was building up too big in my head I was too scared that I was putting myself in danger. So, but it ended up being just fine. I worked through it. I did take a lot of ibuprofen for the last 2.5 weeks of the trip. I won't lie about that. This is another system that I came up with. I had these little chunks of sausage that I would put in my little lunch bag. And there were a couple that I would put in there that I would stick 2 ibuprofen in, so that during the paddle, while I went to have my lunch, I could go, oh, yeah, okay, 4 hours is ibuprofen time, and just eat that sausage. So it was kind of like giving your pet, a dog, a pill, So,
Calvin,
I did that to myself just because I know I wasn't going to be able to get the bottle out while I'm bobbing up and down. So, I had to come up with something. So,
Calvin, two kind of related questions. What did you bring along that you consider safety equipment? And then related to that, what was your plan B if you actually injured yourself?
Sure. There are a lot of places along the way that there are some remote communities along the way, and there's some freight boats that go in between them. And so I knew up to a certain point I had the ability to kind of get to the closest spot, or catch someone on the radio and try to get on one of those boats and go back to a bigger city, and find my way home. The very northwestern tip of the island, that really isn't possible. It's very remote and very kind of national park and there. So I kind of had to make that choice about what I was doing before I got to that point. In terms of safety gear, I Well, I mean, all the things for communication or signaling. So I showed there some flares and lights and things. I had a GPS that could also do a satellite text if I needed to. I had a PLB that I wore in my life jacket every day, tethered to it, so that I could, if for some reason on the water I needed to, I could do that. If I wasn't able to get back to shore or something catastrophic had happened with myself and, you know, my body, or who knows, paddles, I don't know. And I mean, I think a lot, mostly when I think of safety, I do think about, I had really good charts for the trip. It took up a lot of space in my boat, but I'm glad I brought them. I had, you know, really thought about how to navigate those areas each day and really laid it out carefully. And I think a lot of that risk assessment was what I considered the biggest safety bit. You know, taking the time and just having that routine of really laying out the weather carefully and considering it and looking, you know, X number of hours ahead every time, and trying to consider that. I think there were some other things. I had some fire starting material. I had some, just the extra sets of warm clothes, and the fact that I chose synthetic instead of, I didn't have any down on the trip with me because I knew it would just be useless if it got wet. And I think there's a lot of little things like that that kind of stack up, but I consider it all safety equipment, if that makes sense. Does that answer what you're looking for?
It does. I guess I would amend the question to what you included with your first aid kit. For example, did you have suture material? Did you take antibiotics with you?
I did have antibiotics. I had kind of suture bandages with me. I had different painkiller. I had a lot of just bandage and a lot of blister material because I kind of expected that to happen one way or the other. I had some different, one thing that was useful is I had some kind of lotion or some zinc oxide too. I actually, one of the hardest things is on the coast, sometimes breaking out for the day, just you'd have these really big waves you had to punch through, and then I'd get fine sand in my dry suit gasket, and then that would just rub all day. And I ended up, day after day, I ended up with just this raw stretch across my neck. So putting anything I could put on there to kind of cool it and comfort it was nice. But I often forget about that. That was one of the harder parts, was just getting that neck rash on different days. And so then trying to wipe the gasket out at night and hoping I didn't have to break out through waves the next day so that it wouldn't, you know, get more sand in it. I also did a lot of very carefully, I mean, I had a whole kind of routine ritual almost when I put my dry suit on, where it just like, I got very calm and everything had to stop and I had to be so gentle and so gentle. I brought extra gaskets with me, but I knew that it was just like, and I would just tell myself, be gentle, like your life depends on it, and just make sure I didn't tear that gasket when I was putting it on, because it was so important for the day. So.
Thank you.
Got a question on your risk assessment strategy.
Sure.
Good. How did you know you had multiple factors? How did you rate them? And more importantly, how did you work through it in your mind to make sure whatever assessment you got was really objective, and then stay with it, not then sort of second guess yourself?
Sure. Things are, you know, pretty relative for a paddler. And so I would rate them just on that. I kind of showed a little picture of it. It was kind of a target, and it was red, yellow, and green. Any red was like a definite no-go. Any one factor could just be like, nope, we're not doing this today. And that could be really high wind, or it could be, you know, a really big swell, or it could be that, oh boy, my shoulder really hurts, you know, like it could be anything. Could be like, hey, nope, not today. And then it's kind of like trying to figure out I'd try to take any individual factor and say, okay, for this alone, where would I rate it in that? And, you know, it's kind of a spectrum. And then step back and take a look at that target and say, okay, am I mostly in a safe zone, or am I starting to stack things towards the red, or in towards the really deep yellow? And there were days when I'd have to say, okay, well, you know, if it was just a couple of these things or one of these things, I'd be like, hey, let's go for it. But I'm really starting to stack the deck against myself, and I need to kind of go, okay, maybe that doesn't work. Part of how I was able to do that was I would always do a risk assessment in the evening. I'd sleep on it, and I'd do the same thing again in the morning and kind of check myself and go, okay, after a night's sleep, trying to, you know, have, you know, okay, I'm not worried about like how far am I going, like just waking up, drinking tea, eating my oatmeal kind of fresh. How does this seem accurate to me still? And there were times when I changed it, I realized like, oh, when I went to go to bed, I was kind of disappointed that I didn't get as far as I thought I would. So I was trying to push it for the next day. But then when I saw it in the morning, I'd go, that doesn't matter. It's still a little risky, and maybe I need to do another short day or not try to do that big push, you know? So I think that really helped, doing it in the evening and then doing it again fresh in the morning to look at it. So.
And when you were studying about weather, can you recommend how you learned about weather?
Yes. There is a book called Pacific Northwest Weather, or Weather of the Pacific Northwest. I can't remember which, but it's written by a fellow who in Oregon who has been a meteorologist for decades, and it is one of the best weather books I've ever seen, and it's really specific to our area. And so I would highly recommend that. I found the book. The one I was referring to is actually by George R. Miller. It's called Pacific Northwest Weather. And that's the book that I had read. So yeah, George R. Miller was the author, and it was quite good. It's full of dad jokes, so get ready for that if you ever read a copy of it. But
there's two questions here, actually. When you capsized, how do you re-enter into the kayak?
So I only capsized three times. Twice I rolled, and then the other time I did a re-enter and roll, and then surfed into the beach and emptied myself out. Every time happened close to the beach when I was trying to break out. So that was that was pretty good. I had actually practiced so many self-rescues that I got to the point where once I was out and in the swell, there were days when I would climb out, kind of get out on my belly on the deck and go to the back of the boat to be able to pull my skeg, because it would get so full of sand trying to get off the beach that it wouldn't work, but I really needed the skeg because of the wind. And so like I'd be able to like scoot out there, pull it, scoot back in. So I really recommend just like anything you do to improve your balance and practice self-rescues. Like that was no problem. I wasn't worried about falling out. It was just that big energy right where the shore hits.
Yeah. One more question. Do the campsites have phone signals?
Occasionally. Most of them did not. There were some that did, and then the majority of the days just no cell signal. So, but I was able to get VHF reception pretty much everywhere. Occasionally I'd have to walk a little bit and maybe get up a little higher and do the dance with your VHF radio where you try to get it pointed in the right direction. But yeah.
All right. So ladies and gentlemen of the jury, let's give a big round of virtual applause to our good friend Kevin. Thank you for surviving that trip and coming back to tell us.
Yeah.
God, that was just amazing.
It's fantastic.
That was fantastic.